Good morning, and welcome to March 2016's Mytech U, where we're going to be talking about the small business movement in the United States. My name is Philip Holt. I work here at Mytech as a solution architect, and I'm joined today by Nathan Austin, our VP of Business Development, who is going to be presenting on a topic that's really passionate for those of us who work here at Mytech and who are a part of the community and involved in the small business. So I'd like to go ahead and introduce Nathan and have him share with him some of his thoughts and relate what we've been seeing and what we're experiencing.
Thanks, Philip. Hello, my name's Nate, as Philip mentioned, and today, as Philip mentioned, this is a topic that's not only near and dear, a big part of Mytech's overall mission and vision, which we'll touch on, but it's also very close to my heart as far as the impact that small businesses can have on our community and our world. So let's kick this off and start with, why are we talking about this today? This is going to be a little bit of a different presentation than we've historically done. Typically, we're digging into some technology and we're talking about functionality and how it can impact and the business problems you're trying to solve. And that's usually what the Mytech U discussion is about. But today, it's really going to be about kind of building a case for why how small businesses have such an impact, why is it important for the small business community, and how they can work with the nonprofits, and how, and really at the end, a call to action for any small business, people that work with small businesses or who are owners of small businesses to recognize the impact that they can have by working together. So that's also part of the theme that we're going to have for Tech Pulse this year, is really celebrating the small business movement and the impact that small businesses have on our community and our world. So why? Well, one of the things, small businesses work really hard. I'm not just talking about the owners, I'm talking about nearly every single person who works at a small business. It's extremely rare to find someone who works at a small business that does not wear multiple hats. That applies to nonprofits as well. So the other part about small businesses and why is we feel that this segment, the small business world and nonprofit world, is very much largely underserved. They don't typically have the focus of large companies and a lot of large manufacturers anyway. They really focus on the medium and large segment, and oftentimes the enterprise segment, less about the small and medium business community. So it's something where, in order for us to have as much of a positive impact as possible, we really need to help each other out and realize that it's that we can accomplish more together. And we also, I think the other thing about small businesses that are different than large businesses is that we care about our team. Not that large businesses don't. However, they're definitely not a number. It's not going to be a round of layoffs to serve or make sure that we're hitting some quarterly number on Wall Street. Our team members become close to family members, and so it's it's a big part of the community we live as far as caring about our team. And finally, one thing I always like to mention, anytime I've ever asked this question, I've never had a small business person say that yes to this, which is I always ask how many small business owners, how many small businesses here have received a federal bailout back in the most recent recession. Small businesses, if they were in that position, they would have just gone out of business. They wouldn't have been able to. They wouldn't have been in a position to receive a federal bailout by some of the large corporations that did. So, that's kind of trying to build the case for why we're talking about this today. Just understanding that we're an underserved market, but together we can accomplish a lot. So, moving along, according to the Small Business Administration, they actually use the word "small business is big," and that's exactly how they put it on their website. There's a lot of components here about the impact of small businesses and the percentages that they contribute to the U.S. economy. And I'll just kind of let you, I don't need to read these to everybody, but the one that, a couple of them that really caught my eye is that 99.7% of firms that employ people are small businesses. The other one was that 98% of firms that export goods internationally are small businesses. That one actually is the one that surprised me the most, but it's definitely something that that really hit me. And the other thing that I'd like to mention about this is the majority of these firms are that make up that 99.7% are actually less than 9 employees. Interesting statistic. So,
yeah,
Philip,
Nathan,
anything else?
I find that really interesting. The one that stuck out for me was the nearly 43% of private sector payroll. In fact, when I saw that, I know that you have the data to back this up, and I had to actually go back and peel out the spreadsheet and take a look and count the numbers for myself, and that really popped out for me, is that 43% of all paychecks are coming out of this group of employers.
Yeah, and then when you combine that with the 46% of private sector output, it's also kind of, I find that speaks to the point that I said in the first slide, which is we work really hard in small businesses, even though, and sometimes to disproportionate pay to some large companies, some larger organizations, and that's something I think that's also difficult for the small business world. So yeah, interesting way to look at some of this data. Wanted to share just to put a picture together. So what does this really look like? What is exactly a small business? According to the Small Business Administration, it's an enterprise having fewer than 500 employees. Now, one of the Mytech serves this community. In fact, we only have one customer that technically falls outside of this definition that has more than 500 employees. Otherwise, every single customer we work with fits in this small business definition. The other thing that I like to point out, because there are different definitions depending on who you ask, of what is a small business, what is a medium business, what is an enterprise, and for us, and what is commonly referred to in our industry from the technology sector perspective, is we commonly say that small business is those from roughly 10 employees to 99 employees. Medium businesses are those between 100 and 499 employees. And then, of course, the enterprise and large businesses is 500 and above. They probably have some other segments there, but aren't really relevant and important to this conversation. But more than 500 is typically considered large business. And then oftentimes a term that's used is either micro or SOHO, small office, home office, is those organizations that have less than 9 employees. So here's a couple other data points with regard to the most recent census data from the U.S. is that, as you can see, there's 1.1 million firms reporting 10 to 99 that are considered small, with a great combination of 27 million employees overall, and then 85,000 firms across the U.S. reporting that are in the medium category, with a combined total of 16.6 million employees. So over 40 million employees in this segment, and what is often referred to as the small and medium business space, or SMB. So that's kind of why I wanted to frame up understanding what is small business relative to the U.S. Now let's get a little more specific and a little closer to home. Mytech actually has offices in Minnesota and Colorado, so we're going to touch real quick on Minnesota. So let's look more specifically about Minnesota, looking at the different numbers there. It's interesting that Minnesota is basically just over 2% of total firms, 3% of firms that are in the medium space, but again, around a little over 2% again of the overall employees in that same space. One interesting point, just to relate it back to Mytech, and this is something that was a fun little factoid for us to call out, is that Mytech has around 200 customers in Minnesota, which is actually less than 1% of the overall small businesses in this segment. That's actually about 0.7%. So there's a lot. There are a lot of businesses out there. There's a lot of competition in our space, but that's actually what you'll hear from our competitors and our peers, that we don't run across each other a lot because there's just so much business out there. There's so many organizations that we all can help and serve. So that frames it up a little bit for Minnesota. For those who are in Colorado who may be listening online or watching in the future, let's break this down for Colorado. Colorado has a slightly fewer firms. That they're only just under 2% as opposed to just over 2% in Minnesota, and just over 3% instead of about 3 1/3% as exists in Minnesota, and just under 2% again for overall employee count. Relative to the customer base that we have in Colorado, is we have around 100 customers, about half the number of customers in Colorado than we have in Minnesota, which amounts to less than half of 1%, so about 0.4% of the overall small businesses reporting in Colorado. Philip, I don't know if you've heard those numbers before, but any thoughts or reactions on that?
No, I haven't heard those numbers broken out that way. The arithmetic is interesting to see, and I think it underlines my observation, which is kind of the story you're telling here, is that Mytech Partners is a small business, and Mytech Partners serves small business, and so that's part of why some of these numbers are really important to us, and why I think they should be important to other people, is to understand that we have a community, and because of the sheer volume of the number of firms, the opportunity for interaction between them is immense, and I think it's really kind of underutilized, that ability to peer. So.
I really appreciate you mentioning that, Philip, because I feel that that really reinforces the point, is that when Mytech first started working with and getting engaged in peers with our peers about a decade ago, and going back 10 years, I would have been very private and hold my cards close to my chest, so to speak, as far as sharing information. But today, as definitely I believe my eyes and our eyes have been opened, the value of collaboration and the value of collaboration is far greater than the concern of competition, just because of the immense opportunity and the power for us to be able to work together. So that actually feeds very well into the next slide, is that I wanted to tie this to, we've been talking about it, but tying it to, and this isn't necessarily about Mytech, just trying to understand here our perspective, and that, hopefully a call to action for all of us. But for Mytech, our mission is to create success through a visionary approach to IT. And the important part here that I'd like to call out relative to this presentation is creating success for us really means that we want to create success for our employees. We want to create success for our customers. Of course, we need to create success for the company. We need to be a viable company in order to have employees and serve our customers. And finally, if the impact that we can have on our staff and our customers and our customer staff, if we can have a positive impact in that regard, we can actually, through all the connections, have a positive impact on our community and create success in our community as well. So we have some direct interaction as far as how we interact with our community and how we work to create success in our community, not just secondarily through our employees and through our customers, but for now, the create success is really around those components. It's the kind of the pillars of our staff, our customers, our organization, and the community. Then I also want to tie it to part of the reason why we're doing this presentation is because our vision is to provide the best IT experience in North America. And the component I'd like to focus on for this, for the purpose of this presentation, is North America. We strongly believe, again, this is why I'm presenting data, we're talking about data that across the entire U.S., is because the impact that we as a small business community and nonprofit community can have across the country is great. And that's the scale at which we want to have an impact. So by working together, we can have a much bigger wake, so to speak, instead of we're just, again, less than 1% of total businesses that we serve. By working together, we can have a much bigger wake and maybe make it as much as 10%. Even if we get there, we're doing great. So that's the impact we look to have as an organization.
Yeah,
and tying that back to
I think one of the things that I really have always taken away from this is that creating success means different things to different people and to different groups. For some, success is a financial success. For some of them in the nonprofit world that we work with, success is achieving their objectives of meeting their mission statements as well. And our part of being, our vision of providing the best IT experience describes what we do and how we want to do it. But it also identifies us as relative to our peers. And
that's a great point.
One of the things that I think is important for us when we speak internally about peers, we oftentimes are referring to other managed service providers or companies that do like what we do. But as oftentimes as well, when we talk about our peers, we talk about the small business community. We talk about our customers. When we look at the lessons and the learning that we can do, just because our clients do things slightly differently, do a different product delivery than we do, doesn't mean that 80% of the problems and the issues that they have regarding accounting and HR and customer experience have very high overlap. So for us, really, calling out a couple things, I think that success for us, we understand that means different things to different people, and that when we talk about our peers, we're talking about not just other companies like us that do what we do, but also other organizations that face similar challenges that we do, and that includes our customer base.
Yeah, Phil, thanks for pointing that out. In fact, that's I almost wish that I'd put that slide next, because there is a slide later that we are going to touch on the fact that there's some shared challenges, right, that we have that apply to, again, like you said, not just us and people and firms that do what we do, but as well as our customers and the small business community as a whole. So thanks, and I'll refer back to that when we get there. So, but that's a great point. Thank you. Moving on to just giving you a little brief history of small business, and when I mean history, going back about 40, 50 years, really the impact that small businesses have had, you know, and I don't know if it's the 70s is when the SBA really started tracking it, but definitely understanding that small businesses had a significant impact as far as job creation, new job creation, the number of small businesses that have existed, the fact that we've outpaced large businesses over the the last couple decades, and just the overall net new jobs that have been created. There's just a lot of data points here that the 70s and 80s and 90s where the small business movement has been gaining momentum, and wanted to call that out. So just over the last 40 years, just the impact that we've had as a community.
Yeah, I think to look into that discussion, one of the interesting questions to ask would be like, why is this? And I know that you and I, Nathan, have had talks about the ability of some of the technologies and the IT enabling smaller business to be more competitive with large business. I think is a big driver behind some of the reasons for this. And so that's part of, just wanted to point that out, is that why is it that small business can compete with larger businesses the way they couldn't do that historically? And I think a big part of that is the tool sets that are being delivered to smaller groups of people that allow them to work better and more efficiently than larger organizations.
All right. I mean, that's look at right around this time frame is when Apple and Microsoft basically were coming out with with PCs and the Apple II, right, or the Apple. So as well as I think we're also going to see, Philip, because of some of the even more recent trends that we're seeing happen really in the last 18 months and moving forward, that technology is becoming even more available to small businesses. And so I think that the economies of scale that even the under 10 employee organizations are going to experience because of some of the advances and the cost effectiveness of technology today will advance that even further. So we'll have to do a follow-up presentation, say 5 years from now or so, to see how that has impacted that small segment. But no, I totally agree.
That'd be great. Let's go back and talk about how smart we were today, wouldn't we?
Right. So, all right, so let's do more of a recent history, because one of the things I thought was interesting data points as I was doing some research is what's happened since the most recent recession, 2007, 2008, 2009 timeframe. So let's look at some of the revenue performance. So some of the average net profit of the small business community, it's definitely been not a lot on average. One of the things that our financial advisors have really, in our peer group and the financial analysis that we do when we compare financials, we actually do that quarter over quarter with our industry, that what we're advised is 10% is really the minimum. The reason why I say that is because I think there's a perception out there that oftentimes small businesses are just immensely profitable, and on average that's just not the case. And I say that not to be negative about small business and their performance. It's just to illustrate the point of how hard it really is to be successful as a small business. Even in a good year, 8.5% in 2013 is still not where some of our financial advisors say we should be from a minimum perspective of 10%. So that's definitely something that I like. It's one of the things that I wanted to call out. As well as average sales growth. There's an interesting trend here when you look at that. There's actually a negative sales growth in 2009, which is probably not surprising for those of us who went through that period in the working community. But also in 2013, even though the largest average net profit margin appeared over the last several years in 2013, the actual sales growth in 2013 was a little less. So even though the growth percentage had slowed down and decreased a bit, companies were, I don't know if it's because they were saving more or if they were just just trying to hold back because of the uncertainty of what's going to happen in the next couple of years, what they were planning on happening. I don't have all the data points to try and do that analysis, but I thought it was kind of an interesting correlation. And then looking at the corresponding factors, and this, Philip, goes back to your point, which is this illustrates some of the shared challenges that we as a small business community have regardless of what we do. So one of the things I thought was really interesting is small business health insurance premiums have risen over 100% in the last decade, right? That's about a 9% annual increase, depending on the organization. And also, that was interesting is they were and I have references on all this. That's what those numbers refer to. But that small businesses pay their premiums go to a larger share of administrative fees, and which kind of makes sense if you're a large organization and you can spread those administrative costs over more people, then you can probably on average lower those. But because small businesses have fewer employees and fewer people over which to spread those expenses, it takes a larger share of the premium. So that's definitely something that while yes, small businesses have still had some better years recently, they still disproportionately pay more than what large businesses do in some areas. Finally, it's a good indicator across the board of small businesses that over half of them said they've hired new employees in the last few years, and so that's always a good sign that the health of our overall community. So really on average, what this data tells me is that we as small businesses all have the same challenges, and we also have, because of our fewer number of employees individually, not collectively, but individually, that we don't have the economies of scale that large businesses do. Any thoughts on that, Philip?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting way of looking at the numbers. One of the obvious thoughts that came into my head is, and one of the challenges that I know of small businesses, that often capitalization is an issue. Large organizations have access to more capital, and so that they have a down year or a down quarter, they have the ability to survive some of that. Whereas small businesses of fewer people, they know the names of the people who are on the payroll, and it's really important to them. Even if sales are bad and even if profits are down, they got to keep the doors open and they want to keep people employed. So there's that pressure to, when challenged with these higher administrative costs that simply have to get paid, that the access to less and oftentimes less capital means that there's more pressure in a shorter time frame to see actual real profit.
Yeah, that's actually something that I when I was doing research, I ran across some actual data points on that. But that was one of the things when I was saying that the very first slide we were talking about how small businesses, they're closer to, and just by nature of that, care about their employees, and if they're financing that or if they're getting into financial pressures, it's their money. It's very close to home versus public companies and most large institutions. They're spending other people's money oftentimes, right? So that access is also funded in different ways that has different impacts. So without a doubt. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. So speaking of public versus private companies, this is actually something that when we talk about those companies that have greater access, there's out of the 27 million, this I thought was astounding numbers, 27 million small businesses reported of the most recent census, which actually from this perspective was in 2013. Only 5,000 of them are publicly traded. So even though those are the ones that seem to always be in the news and catch everyone's attention, but it's a very small percentage overall. And again, we touched on this number earlier, just how, but really, the majority of the jobs created on an annual basis exist in the privately held companies. Now, to be fair on that point, privately held companies, that does include smaller business, small and medium, as well as larger privately held. But this was in particular focusing on more privately held, but the majority of that's still small business. And then finally, 42% of the private sector work with organizations of fewer than 100 employees. So the point I wanted to make on this is, while we are small individually, collectively, we're actually the majority when we get into that world. Okay, so that frames it up for small business. I feel that's something that we all anecdotally, I feel, have known that small businesses have a good impact and they're a significant part of our economy, but hopefully that framed it up as far as some of the key variables that kind of build a case statistically for the impact small businesses have. But let's not forget about nonprofits. They are a big part of our world, and they're a big part of making our communities healthy. So let's spend a little time talking about nonprofits before we bring it all back together at the end. So According to the Minnesota Council on Nonprofits, great organization. They actually, little plug, they have an event coming up here on April 12th I think in Minneapolis, but you can look them up online, great organization. But they define nonprofit organizations as this statement here, and the key piece that I wanted you to pull out here, so I don't need to read it to you, but is that nonprofits are formed for the purpose of fulfilling a mission to improve the common good of society. Now, that's really the key point that we're trying to make here, and the important role that nonprofits really have in our community.
I think this is the slide you're referring to, Nathan, that really links back to that, for us, that word success. That means so many different things to different people, and that success can be something more than profit. Is that correct?
Absolutely, and without a doubt that creating success is, being able to have, if we can have a part of helping them fulfill their mission of a common good, right? That's absolutely what we're trying to do. And I think also, and we're going to touch a little more on this on the next slide, but a vibrant nonprofit environment is really just critical to a healthy community, because they're really paying attention on initiatives and efforts that are to contribute to the overall good of society. So I appreciate that it's a key part of our world. So let's touch on similar. We talked about okay, let's put some numbers to this. And I know this is a data-intensive presentation, and I'm not a great graph person, so forgive me. But let's talk. So nonprofit community nationwide, a little over 1.5 million reported nonprofits in the U.S. Interesting, 500,000 of them, so about a third of them, are revenue of less than $1 million, or budgets of less than $1 million. So, but the next one I think is fascinating, is that nearly 10% of all wages paid in the U.S. are through the nonprofits. So they are a significant part, not only of helping fulfill missions and providing, improving society and putting their efforts towards that, as opposed to distributing profits, but they actually pay a significant percentage of the overall community and workforce. So that's something not to be undervalued or dismissed. So let's then talk about, all right, so now we have a little bit of an idea of impact. I was looking at some data to break it down for Minnesota and Colorado, but I figured we just start and let's just keep it at the U.S. At the moment. But let's talk about the need and impact that small nonprofits can have, and that the businesses and small businesses can have on them. So interesting data point: $335 billion were given to charity in 2014. That's with a B, pretty big number. Then but then the other piece of that statistic, 72% came from individuals. So that is actually very encouraging for me. I've been to, was at a presentation at Thrive Financial last year, where they talked about percentages of giving and percentage of income giving, and knowing that 72% of charitable giving is actually coming from individuals. Now, that doesn't speak to the quantity of individuals. It just speaks that the percentage of giving is coming from individuals. So that's an encouraging variable, especially if we can get more people creating success. If we can get more people to do that and be able to have enough success so they can give back, then that's great from an individual perspective. This number actually was a little, I don't know if disturbing is the right word, but was a little underwhelming. And then only 5% of charitable giving was coming from corporations. I think that, now I know that we showed the average profit of those organizations, which isn't significant because they're not above the 10% mark, which is oftentimes the minimum watermark that again, we've been advised to hit. But I think that that's something where we could probably do better as a community, as far as corporations giving back to the community from a charitable giving perspective. So that number was a little low from my experience, my perspective. And finally, that's a pretty good number. Over 62 million people actually volunteered, which is over a 25% volunteer rate. So that number actually surprised me. I didn't realize that volunteerism was as significant as it was. Now, granted, it's only for the year September to September of 2013, 2014, but definitely a big number. And finally, sorry, to kind of wrap up that the 63 million people, is that the value that nonprofits receive or estimate that they get out of volunteerism is at about $23 an hour. So considering that when you're volunteering, one of the ways in which you could give money to nonprofits, but by volunteering, the value that you're giving to them is actually they don't have to pay someone $23 an hour to fulfill that work, to do that job. So it does have a significant benefit to nonprofits, even if it's only a few hours of your time. Phillips, any final thoughts there before we move on?
I mean, my thought would be is that oftentimes, perspective of nonprofits, and let me just, as an aside, if I were a marketing guru, I'd find a different way to phrase the term than the group of individuals, the nonprofit. It seems like it almost says not doing anything. But this is real money. This is real work. This is real stuff happening, and it's a very large segment of what we do as a society, and it's really important stuff. But a lot of these, just because we have a nonprofit motivation doesn't mean to tie together to the story here. Nonprofits have the same issues with costs. They still have to employ people. They still have to work people. They still have to maintain an office. So that the tie between nonprofit, meaning sometimes means no financial resources, is really, I think, unappreciated, the amount of money and resources that are involved in that community.
Yeah, I agree, Philip. The other part that nonprofits, as far as if there's any organizations or subset of the small business and or organization community that wear multiple hats, nonprofits definitely excel and exceed for-profit businesses in that regard. At least that's in my experience, because they're working on coordinating so many resources within the community as far as funders and donors, as well as in-kind, just volunteers, as well as then their participants in fulfilling their mission. So they have a really hard job, but they do such great work, and there are real dollars at stake. So anything we can do to help as a community is definitely welcome. So great. So let's tie it together. So we've talked about small businesses. We've talked about nonprofits in the community. But how can we bring this together as far as our ability to drive the impact in our world? So here's some data points as far as that from surveys that were conducted of small businesses, where and some of this is about hiring, but we'll connect that to the community, right? So 96% of employers, basically through one variable or another, saying they're struggling finding people either with the right experience, background, qualifications, et cetera, whether that's education or otherwise, as far as making a hire. So that is a problem. That is a problem for not only the for-profits, it's a problem for the nonprofits, and it's a problem for our community. So in order to help with that, we need to actually try and work together. And actually, according to the survey, 51% of those businesses have said that they are interested and are willing to work with their peers in order to improve that part. And some of those peers, not only their counterparts like within the same industry, but then working with other organizations in the nonprofit world, and of course nonprofits include education, are there as well. So some stats as far as working together. And then and this one is over 60% of small business owners are willing to work with other institutions like educational institutions, community organizations, et cetera, in order to provide job training and placement. So some of the common problems we talked about earlier is like employees, small businesses are hiring people. 54% of them earlier mentioned that they have hired someone in the last few years. They have increasing costs. They all are struggling with the hiring problem. And in order to help with the hiring problem, we need to work together with peers and other community organizations in order to help solve that problem. And we can do it. And so this is, again, just some data points to suggest that not only does the problem exist, and everybody says it exists, it's a problem that we're all shared, but there's ways in which we can solve it by working together across industries and the community. Any thoughts on that, Phil, before I go to the next?
Not at the time.
Okay. So moving on as far as, okay, how can this improve the community? Like, it's working together. What does it mean so we can help improve the community? Well, so one of the things that I feel that we can do as a community in the small business segment is that where we need to, if we can work together to like take some of those challenges away, so we can focus on more on other things that can add a lot of value, such as, for instance, how large firms, 99% of them offer health insurance benefits, where really only about 78% of firms between 10 and 24 are able to and do. So I'm not trying to open up a health insurance or Affordable Care Act political conversation. It's just that having employees that have the ability to provide benefits to employees and health insurance to employees is something that, if we're not a profitable, if as a small business, if we're not profitable enough to be able to offer that, that's the problem. So trying to, if we can be better organizations and be able to make sure across the board we can be more competitive with the larger corporations that are also doing that, then that helps us shrink the gap of employment opportunities that we have in the small business and nonprofit sector. The reason why I point out the over 50% of the working population is in small business is because we have this great impact on a large number of the population, right? So when you talk about 99% of large firms, well, that's actually a subset of the employment base. It's only half of it. So that while 78% is still a decent number, it's not 99%. It has a significant impact on the workforce, the overall workforce population. And the other part about if we can create new jobs in the small business, which we already do, but by creating a good work environment, by creating more jobs, by creating the go-giver mentality, I throw that in because that's something about knowing that giving back, whether it be giving to another person, that helping another person next to you, helping the community, helping a nonprofit, helping a coworker, helping a peer, helping a vendor partner, that we have this impact. And if we can actually create this environment and foster the mentality of giving back, then we can have, because as a collective, we have an impact over such a large percentage of our population and our overall world, we actually can have a significant impact. So I think as opposed to just looking at ourselves as, one employer of less than 100 people or less than 500 people in their organization, collectively, if we can work on this together, we can do great work. So, all right. So before I get to the call to action, Philip, any final thoughts on that section? Nope. All right. Very good. So this is what this presentation was really all about, coming down to is we really want you to be part of the small business movement. We are striving for this, and we want to ask you to help. So first of all, celebrate the impact small businesses and nonprofits are having in our community. It's a big part, and we wanted to just say thank you. All of this data points, you're a part of all those data points. I know I'm not trying to say you're a statistic, but we're all contributing to that impact that all that data suggests, as far as the number of jobs we're creating, the revenue that we're creating, the donations and the charitable giving that are going to the nonprofit community. We're all part of that. So recognize and celebrate that, and I thank you for doing your part. The next one is, I really want to say, consider, if you haven't done this as an organization, and whether you're the owner or an employee of a small business, see if you can find a way to give back to your community. Encourage volunteerism. See what you can do. At Mytech, one of the things that we've learned, our culture committee drove volunteerism. We give a paid day a year for our employees to go volunteer, and they organize groups to be able to go to different nonprofits to volunteer. That's something that we just started that, so we're just kind of getting our feet wet on that one, and we're learning. But that's something that we've done. Also, one of the things that Mytech has done from the beginning of our organization is, the part of that creating success for us. We've picked 6 nonprofits over the years that we donate our services to. So we have a service that oftentimes smaller organizations, can be a significant dollar amount. And so for 6 nonprofits in town in Minnesota, we actually donate our services to them. And finally, we also contribute to their fundraising campaigns. There's many of our customers are nonprofits. For most of them, nearly all of them, when they've asked us if they've got a fundraising campaign or a gala, we're donating or bringing our employees there, exposing them to it, or contributing to it. So that's one of the ways that we as an organization have worked to give back to our community and fostering that within our employees. And part of this webinar is trying to foster that amongst the people with whom we have contact and influence, of our customers and any of our vendor partners in the community as well. So if that's not part of your organization, if you can personally try and find a way to give back, or through your employees or through your staff or through the other your coworkers, find a way to give back as well. And finally, one of the things that if the second point is a challenge, as far as you're not sure where to start, you're not sure some of the areas and where some of those opportunities exist, I would encourage you to come to Tech Pulse. That's on April 20th. The website's TwincitiesTechPulse.com. I'm not trying to make it a shameless plug. It's just that we invite community partners. That's one of the other ways we give back to some of our community partners, is our nonprofit community members, is that we allow them to exhibit at our event to try and expose them to other business leaders and employees in the Twin Cities, so they can find volunteers, find something that you're passionate about, connect with industry peers, connect with other small business owners and small business leaders, as far as trying to have and trying to drive how you can help each other out, because there's so much more value in collaboration than there is in competition in the small business space. So those are my calls to action, and hopefully we build a case as far as the data. I know it's a lot of data, but hopefully that told a good story as far as why this is important, and gave you a few ways in which you can have an impact. Philip, thoughts, comments?
Yeah, my final thoughts, I think, to summarize kind of where we're coming up, is really that small businesses are a defined community. There are words and numbers that define that group of people, and the call to action really is that small businesses need to proactively engage in that community. Just because we're lumped together on a spreadsheet isn't enough. We need to work together with one another to engage as a community. And I think the revolution, or the small business movement that's occurring, is really driven by the fact that there are 21st century technologies that allow greater connectivity of these organizations, whether that be through social media or through those opportunities that really allows geodiverse organizations to bind together in a way they never have before. And large organizations have always had the ability to trade with one another, be it goods or ideas, in a way that's been very difficult for a small organization in Ohio to peer with or share ideas with someone in New York. And I think there's a momentum building there, but it requires an active participation from the small business community. So I'm really excited about that. I'm glad to be a part of it. And I think that ties back to this small boat, large wake that we're really trying to push. And again, I'd like to, the plug here is TwinCitiesTechPulse.com. It's an organization of small businesses. We get together, share technological ideas, and identify how we can help one another, as well as how we can work with larger organizations and vendors, the technologies that are there. And maybe, Nathan, you can who's all is welcome to join us here at TechPulse?
Yeah, really anyone in the community. We primarily have it put together as feedback from our customers that they want a way to educate themselves about technology in an efficient way, and so we try and combine a lot of that into a single day. But we also try and make it about networking and partnering and peering. In fact, that's what the lunch session is about, is trying to get people that are facing the similar problems or have overcome similar problems to work together. The data, there's only a couple data points that talk about how we have shared challenges, but we have the benefit in our position of working with lots of different industries in the small business space, and I promise you we all have the same problems. We all have the same challenges, and but we don't all have to reinvent the wheel every single time. So as you said, Philip, if we can be intentional about peering and collaborating, like many things in life, you get out of it what you put into it. So it does take effort and intentionality. I don't even know if that's a word, but it does take effort, but it definitely reaps rewards for not only yourself and your own success and your own organization's success, but has trickle-down effects into your staff and your customers and their staff and in the community. So with that, I would definitely like to say thank you very much for participating and listening. Philip and my email, if you're interested in joining the movement and being part of any future efforts of collaboration, by all means, give us a shout, and we would love to work with you. So thank you very much. Any final thoughts, Philip, before we sign off?
TwinCitiesTechPulse.com.
Very good. All right.
Subtle enough.
That was very good. I think that was the actual formal shameless plug. So very good.
Yes,
Thanks a lot, everyone. And this will be recorded. It's been recorded and it'll be available online inside of 24 hours. Have a great day. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.